Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I hope you are all staying safe and healthy. Welcome to the Voices of Sustainability Virtual Fireside Chat series. I'm Linda Ricci, and I am super excited to be here today. A little bit about me. I have a long career advising executive management teams at some of the world's most successful companies around how to enter, market, and monetize transformational and emerging technologies. I also regularly speak on various stages about the metaverse and the impact it will have. The Zayed Sustainability Prize was established in 2008 as the United Arab Emirates Pioneering Global Award for recognizing organizations and global high schools for their sustainable, innovative, and humanitarian solutions. Today, the prize counts 15 years of global impact with 378 million people across the world benefiting from its winner solutions across the categories of health, food, energy, water, and global high schools. So today's episode is titled Building a More Sustainable World Through the Metaverse. And today's digital technologies, so big data, artificial intelligence, the metaverse, which are the topics of today's discussions, have the power to help us create a more sustainable world. With our guests today, we are delving deep to understand the transformational potential of the metaverse and explore how it is opening new dimensions of sustainability that pose both significant challenges to global climate objectives and new opportunities for achieving them. And we will also explore how the metaverse can be leveraged for humanitarian impact, something that's very relevant today. So let's dive in with some incredible guests, and we really do have an all-star panel today. We have Dr. Hao Li, we have Judith Okonkwo, and we have Jon Copestake. I'm going to ask them, because I cannot do their own backgrounds justice, they're so amazing, to introduce themselves quickly. So Hao, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for introducing me, Linda. My name is Hao Li. I'm an associate professor in computer vision at the Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence. I'm also director of the Metaverse Lab. It's a new research center that focuses on metaverse research. And I'm also CEO and co-founder of a artificial intelligence startup called Pinscreen.
Awesome. See, there's no way I could have done that. You do that much better than I would have. Judith, do you want to go next?
Of course. Thank you so much, Linda. Hi, everyone. My name is Judith Okonkwo. I'm the founder of Imìsí 3D. We are an XR creation lab that's headquartered in Lagos, Nigeria. And we're focused on doing whatever we can to grow the XR ecosystem across the African continent. I'm also the co-founder of We Will Lead Africa, a platform for everyday African leadership stories.
Fantastic. Jon, you want to go?
Sure. So I'm Jon Copestake. I'm the Lead Consumer Analyst at EY. Typically, that means that I work with projects that have the word future in the title. So people often call me a consumer futurist. I worked on our Future Consumer Now programs and our Future Consumer Insight Index and our Future of Retail programs. So very much engaged with emerging technologies and what they can mean for the world and businesses.
Wonderful. I have a few ground rules, just one really before we start. Today is a discussion, so I invite you to please jump in. And if you have something to add or if you have any additional points to make, please do. The subject matter lends itself to a lively conversation, so please don't hold back. I'm going to start off with a basic question, just so we level set, because there's a lot of confusion around the word metaverse. So let's just very briefly, because we can talk about that for an hour just for that, but very briefly, in your own words, tell me how you define what the metaverse is. Again, I'll go in the same order. How, what is your definition?
Right. So in my opinion, I mean, we haven't built the metaverse yet. It's still in its concept phase. And in my opinion, from a technical standpoint, the metaverse is in some ways, in short, like a spatial internet, right? So it's basically an online space that can be based on both augmented and virtual reality. It should be based on cloud technology, and it has the capability for a huge amount of people to actually arbitrarily connect to the space. They can interact with each other. They can live in worlds that they want. They have the ability to augment the reality they are in and draw from information from this metaverse. And there are two key functionalities. One is it can fully immerse you inside it. So it's a little bit like virtual reality. And the other one is augmented reality, which allows you to augment your reality with important spatial information that can help you navigate better through the real world.
Okay, great. Judith, same question.
All right. So I would echo a lot of what Hal just said, but also one thing I usually add to that is we don't know, we don't know yet what the metaverse is or will be. I think a lot of people are trying to figure it out. I often say it's sort of like the next evolution of the internet, and imagine that sort of like in 3 dimensions where you can sort of like have, extended like amounts of time in it. But I think it's something that's still evolving, and we've got to get lots of voices involved in shaping it.
Mm-hmm. True, absolutely true. John, it's always hard to be the last one after there's 2 great comments, but I'd love to hear your take as well.
Well, they've said exactly what I was going to say, so I think I'll go with something slightly different. I mean, there's a key thing here about the metaverse. Clearly, it is the next iteration of the internet. Clearly, it will be potentially 3-dimensional, immersive, and use AR and VR. There are 2 things that I would add to that I think are really important. One is interoperability. So the fact that it will actually enable lots and lots of communities to coalesce using similar code and being able to actually interact in a very even way and an even playing field. And I think that the other one is that it can actually generate virtual economies in a way that maybe previous iterations of the internet couldn't. So we can start seeing parallel economies emerge. But I would definitely concur with my other guests that it really is not fully formed yet. It's years, possibly decades away from seeing full utility. So what the metaverse becomes really is in the hands of people today.
Awesome. All right, good start.
If
Go ahead, Hal.
If I can add something, I think one thing that I think is, we try to define what the metaverse is from different standpoint these days. I think one thing that is important to consider is what is the purpose of the metaverse and why do we need it? And I think that because you have all these immersive technologies, one of its big potential is to find a better spatial relationship with things that we sense, right? So basically, we live in the real world, it's 3-dimensional. So whatever we can do virtually, it should also be 3-dimensional. So
Agreed.
I think there are 3 important things about what I think the purpose of the metaverse is. First of all, is enhancing our presence in a virtual space, meaning that we can enable things like telepresence, we can teleport ourselves anywhere we want, we can interact virtually, in remote distances. The second thing is because everything is virtual, they have no materials, it's nothing tangible associated to it. So what it means is that there is no cost in creating those things. So that itself is something that's important to consider. And the third thing I think is simply that the ability to, in our real lives, we can always enhance safety, we can enhance things by putting things there, but using virtual assets, you have more capabilities to do so, right? So if you wanted to see that there is some danger, you see an area where people have COVID, if you could visualize it, you can give people a warning sign that could be potentially more effective.
Hao, you bring up some amazing points that you're already starting to ask. Going to get into my next question, so I love that you're getting ahead of it. Let me ask, what role does the group think the metaverse can play in driving the future of real-world sustainability? And as part of that, what are some of the key positive environmental aspects of the metaverse? John, take it away. You can be first.
So I think that there's 3 areas where it can have a really strong positive influence, and they frame around consumers, companies, and then policymakers or research. So for consumers, that there's some clear benefits that the metaverse can bring. Consumers that engage more digitally will consume less physically. Now, that's not to say they're going to stop eating and drinking, but certainly a lot of the things that maybe they have around them in the home, they won't need as much of in the metaverse. So I think there's an element of dialing down that physical consumption, which dials down the resource use that we make in the real world. That's a really important one. And then also, if you think about the barriers to travel that it takes away, if people can transport themselves anywhere in the metaverse as though they're in real life, then suddenly air travel, commuting, all of those things become much lower resource constraints from the environment. So there's a big element there. But for me, from a consumer perspective, there's also a visceral element. Consumers are logical, but they're also very emotional beings. And the internet really accelerated people's awareness of environmental issues, sustainability. The metaverse has the ability to make that much more real and tangible for them. They can touch and feel. And if you remember, if you notice how a lot of the step changes in consumer perceptions around sustainability, they've been driven by media, they've been driven by documentaries or films. And if you think about the metaverse as driving that, it actually might position consumers more actively. But for businesses and for research and policymakers, there's much more tangible things they can do. Digital twins can unlock new efficiencies. They can use that to plan things more efficiently. You could use biomimicry in the metaverse more effectively than you can using two-dimensional modeling. And you can also look at areas, like geoengineering projects and digital twins of the Earth. So I know NVIDIA's Earth 2 project is a key thing here that can enable people to run scenarios. And those things will really start to allow us to measure and take positive action that we know will actually make improvements. So I think there's a lot of positivity you can drive from that.
All right, Judith, I know that you're working a lot with education, so I'm assuming you want to answer that from the lens of that. I'd love to hear what you think. Yeah,
absolutely. When Hao was sort of going through some of the affordances, of the metaverse, I just kept thinking about if you just apply that to SDG 4, it's transformational, right? And often when I'm talking about education, I like to paint a portrait that gives you a sense of what it's like on the ground in a city like Lagos, for example. So the majority of the population will be in the public school system, well over 80 or 90%. And that public school system is truly overburdened. I mean, it really has not kept pace with population. It's not kept pace with so many things, infrastructure and all of that, to be able to cater for the number of young people that we have. So if you go into the average secondary school, so that's like middle and high school equivalents, you'll easily have maybe 80 students in the classroom and one teacher. And it will be a basic structure. So just chairs, tables, and a black or whiteboard. And that's it. And when I think about how we can get these children from sort of like that basic setup to the kind of learning experiences that will really improve learning outcomes, how can we make sure they have access to labs, so that they can do experiments? How can they go on field trips, that sort of thing? All of a sudden, virtual reality starts to make a lot of sense, And it's really sort of like bringing, this whole sustainability concept to life, because if we think about what we might have tried to invest, both in terms of kind of like resources and money to start to build enough brick and mortar, spaces that will have the right facilities to start to train the right people. There's no time for that. But if you have a virtual reality lab with the right content, and of course that has to be stressed, right? Then all of a sudden you can allow students to go in there, they can do virtual experiments. And of course we, on this panel so far, even talked about the fact that you can do it over and over again. And because you're not using actual tangible resources,
right,
the amount of times you can do that is almost limitless, which would not be possible in the real world. And of course, there's all of that opportunity to traverse the world, to even go outside planet Earth. All of these available for children, and starting to bridge that gap between the quality of education they have right now and what we hope for the world in general.
I saw on your website that you are handing out VR kits with solar panels, with solar energy. That's fabulous. I think that's just such a solution for areas that don't have access to unfettered electricity. I think it's fabulous.
Yes, that's definitely the goal, that if we're looking at low to mid-cost VR headsets that are all-in-one headsets, that they can be charged by solar portables, which is a game changer in terms of increasing access. Yeah,
seriously.
So, yeah, it is. And
it was great.
Yeah, and we will get to solar, but it's a journey that we're excited to be on.
I know that Jon touched on digital twins. I know this is your pet area because it's what you work with. But how do you see digital twins being part of the key part of the sustainability solution?
Right. So one big opportunity with this concept of the metaverse is that you have the ability to capture the physical world as it is. You have the ability to model it, but you also have the ability to simulate and predict things without actually doing the thing in the physical world. So it's a little bit like in visual effects. So instead of destroying an actual building, you can actually just create a simulation and make it look like it. So what this means is that you have a very powerful tool that allows you to optimize reality using a simulated framework. Just think of it, you have an entire city, you have a lot of buildings in there, and we know that buildings, they probably contribute to over 30% of all the global energy that is being used. Just think of like the operation of it, ACs, heating systems, etc. So what is possible and what people have shown is that inside this virtual environment, you actually have the ability to reduce to 50% just by having a simulation that allows you to predict and optimize, these systems better.
So you're talking about reducing building costs. You're talking about all sorts of things like that, right? Building, mining, to somebody else's point before.
Right. So just think of it as a solution. So if we're talking about climate change, for instance, we could basically build a spatial environment that has the ability to have very accurate predictions and simulations. You can use AI models to predict air pollution, carbon emission, and not only just predict and visualize these things, but you may also have the ability to identify what are the actions that are required. How can you optimize how we build these buildings? I mean, it's one example, right? So I know that people are also using this for in the food industry, right? So they're trying to reduce the amount of food waste by having imaging systems that are basically sensing how fruits, for instance, how they are being stored, etc. Right? So being able to monitor and simulate these kind of things.
That's great. So I have to be honest here, and I think we all have acknowledged this. The metaverse also has its downsides, right? And according to DataQuest, analysts are worried that the technologies associated with the metaverse could lead to an influx of greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm going to actually say will lead, let's be honest, that they're heavy. Hao and I had a conversation before this where we talked about the impact of artificial intelligence, and I actually did not know some of the stats. He told me they were incredible. So virtual reality technology and data centers using AI and cloud services do in fact require quite large amounts of energy. So what are some of the metaverse's potential risks to sustainability? And more importantly, how do you think we can avoid those? Hao, I know this is your pet. I know you love this and you're nodding your head, so go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, in order to build something like, metaverse systems, it requires a lot of computer graphics hardware, right? So GPUs that are, people are thinking about like putting them into data centers, taking them away from, consumer hardware. You need a lot of AI that has that can solve these computer vision problems, that has the ability to predict certain models. So again, you need a lot of GPU processing. And one of the issues there is that these kind of processes actually require a ton of energy. And it's actually, in some ways, it's kind of ridiculous how much energy they require. There's some studies that basically show that, for a deep language model, an average one, it could require as much energy as 5 cars for their entire lifetime, right? So in terms of CO2 emission, training one of these ChatGPT like language models costs, almost $5 million. So these numbers are huge, right? So they require a lot of power. In our labs, we also have sometimes power issues because there's not enough wattage to basically power these things. So what researchers are looking at, of course, is how can we actually regulate and how can we improve on this highly inefficient energy usage, right? So of course, you can always talk about policies, but from a technological standpoint, the approaches are better algorithms that have smaller models. Researchers are already making a lot of progress in showing how you can actually use much smaller models that are more efficient. You can use crazy technologies like optical neural networks that don't even require electricity at all, right? So there are people looking at various approaches. Currently in the industry, what people do is they try to separate, deep model training with inference. They're trying to reuse a lot of the redundancy in their computes. So all these things can actually be reduced, but it's an active area of research. And one interesting thing is that we can use the metaverse, we can use digital twins to basically simulate and visualize, and we have to visualize the impact so that people can have a better KPI on how to improve these things.
All right, that makes sense. Jon, what do you think? What are some of the metaverse's potential risks to sustainability from your lens, and how can we potentially avoid them?
So I completely agree with Hao about the energy intensity, and I think that building the infrastructure that will comprise the metaverse in the future is going to be a significant lag on resources, not just from an energy perspective and a carbon emissions in that sense perspective, but all of the things that need to be done are going to be significantly erosive to the environment. However, there is a counterpoint to that, which is this doesn't necessarily point to a challenge that the metaverse has. It points more to a challenge that we have with our reliance on fossil fuels to generate energy. And one of the things that I've seen a lot of is the migration of servers to places where they can use renewable energy. So I think there's a lot of optimism and around the fact that we're seeing, especially in the current climate with high fossil fuel costs, we're seeing a great deal of innovation and a great deal of drive towards renewable as a sustainable source of energy for the future. That helps resolve part of that issue. I think Judith may cover it better, but I also think that from a social perspective within sustainability, the metaverse gives with one hand, providing greater access to education. Those things are fantastic, but with the other, it does also take away, because there are elements where you could see an advancement in isolation. You can see hikikomori communities who are kind of very insular groups of people are growing around the world. You could see some social dislocation as a result of it, and I think that that's also one of the things that people need to consider. But again, it's like the internet. The internet empowered people in so many fantastic new ways and became embedded into our everyday life. At the same time, elements of the internet became very, very dark, very, very distorted, and much more of an echo chamber, which was very negative. So it works both ways.
Understood. Judith, do you have anything you wanna comment? How do we avoid some of the potential risks?
I think the first comment I'd like to make is just talking about sort of like, that huge energy cost to the metaverse and what it needs in places where that energy is not readily available. And if I look at, if you're in a city like Lagos, for example, the one thing for sure is that you can't rely on power from the grid 100%. So, if you can afford it, everybody has a backup generator. And right now there's even a fuel and a diesel shortage. You know what I mean? So kind of like all of these considerations mean that if you're here and you want to play actively in that space, then you're already severely handicapped. And I think that that's, a further push to look for solutions, like renewables and all of that can start to bridge the gap, as well as all of the solutions that Hao mentioned that are already in play to start to reduce that energy cost significantly. And then sort of like the other part that, or aspect that I wanted to mention related to sort of like this cost is that when we think about, climate change and all of that, I think that there's still a severe knowledge gap. And this is one thing that I hope the metaverse can start to address, through education initiatives, through awareness initiatives, that people will start to understand what we're talking about, what's happening to our planet. And because these technologies will allow us to bring it to life in ways that will always go beyond whatever can be said, just orally or through videos, I'm hoping that can start to shift the needle a bit more.
Yeah, so agreed. Go ahead, Hao.
Maybe worth mentioning that it is not yet a problem in terms of energy, right? So it's a potential problem. And on the good side is we don't have the compute yet to even empower the kind of metaverse infrastructure that we're thinking about, right? So the one that doesn't look like a cheesy video game where people, to each other. The kind of metaverse.
Hey now.
The kind of metaverse that we're thinking about is one that is really good, right? So one that really feels like you're in there, you have the ability to generate whatever you want. It will require a lot of power, but the compute isn't there, and you can easily see this. People are also struggling in building headsets that are usable, right? They are extremely heavy. They require a lot of power, so you can't even use them for an extended period of time. So it's not like we already have everything and it's already a problem for for the Earth, but it could be, right? It's something that we need to take into account when we're designing these kind of solutions.
I think the headset, we're definitely in a year of the headset, right? There's a lot of new ones coming out. I was just at the MIT hackathon and some of the sponsors were bringing out the stuff that hasn't hit the market yet. Truly, this is going to be the year of the amazing headset, I think. It's just can't say more. Really cool stuff. I know that Judith, you touched on what I was going to ask next, which is environmental sustainability and social sustainability. Because how do you see the metaverse positively impacting businesses and communities, and particularly organizations working in low and middle income countries that presently lack some of the levels of access to digital technologies and innovations and electricity, let's be honest. For example, one of the things I think you mentioned to me, or how somebody mentioned that there are 1 billion, I was on your website, 1 billion children lack access to quality education. I mean, that's an unbelievable number. So could you talk a little bit about the work you're doing in the VR for schools and how XR is being used for social impact? And then we'll ask the other people the same question.
Absolutely. So just going back to sort of like the transformational effect, XR, in this case, VR can have in the education space. One thing that we certainly saw over the last few decades, there was this huge push to get more and more children into school. And that started to happen, right? So we started to see more children getting into school. But the problem was that we didn't see sort of like a commensurate change when it comes to learning outcomes. So that was the first problem. The second, of course, is that even that advancement that we saw in terms of more children going into school, there's been a little bit of a reverse with the pandemic and everything being disrupted, and the fact that subsequently not as many children have gotten back into schools. If I use Nigeria as a reference case, I mean, we have the unfortunate kind of like statistic of being the country with the highest number of out-of-school children in the world. Prior to the pandemic, it was around 13 million. Today, it's around 19 million children, which is really, really scandalous. And for me, the exciting thing about these technologies or using a tool like virtual reality is that when we get it right, because this is still a process, this is still a journey, I was talking about sort of like the cartoon-like experiences so far, but I think 2, 3, 5 years down the line, what it has really involved when we're able to integrate AI a lot more, where when you have a learning experience, it's truly a self-guided learning experience that's taking you through relevant curriculum. It then means that, yes, you can use it in schools and you can use it as a learning aid with teachers supporting, but in the worst case scenarios, you can even, as I say, if the children can't come to school, you take school to the children. And if we can get those headsets to the very last mile, if these are headsets that can be powered by solar portables, that means wherever you are in the world, almost, right, that we can get it to you and that you can start to learn, and that in some way we're able to, leapfrog in a little way, sort of like the social cultural, constraints that affect people being able to get to school, children being able to get to school. So that's something I'm really excited about seeing. The other thing, of course, is, and this is now looking at the affordances, like with these technologies for young people today, more and more, particularly since there's been this whole metaverse hype over the last sort of like 18 months, a lot of young people here have started, studying Unity and trying to get up to speed with like XR development, learning about creating filters, on social media platforms. What this means is that in little ways, they're starting to support small businesses who want to leverage this to up their sales, which is fantastic. and it's getting that cycle going in the economy. That's really, really great to see. It also means that, you know, in little ways, not in the big ways that we might want to, but we're starting to get ready for that fourth industrial revolution. Yeah, step by step.
I love it. I love the idea that VR is unlocking the human capital and the human potential. And we have so many people in the world who can contribute to solving some of these sustainable issues and others. And this is one way that it'll happen. Jon, do you have anything you want to add to this?
I mean, I think the digital divide is a key issue, but that's not just a key issue for the metaverse. It's a key issue for the internet. Even, I mean, I know people even in the US who told me that they knew of people who would have to go to free Wi-Fi places in order to homeschool their children because they couldn't afford the internet at home. So I think that points to a very, very short period of well, maybe even a longer period of pain points for people in order to get access, and the access to what will become the metaverse is probably likely to be bifurcated initially. So initially, you know, only the most wealthy countries or people may have full access and be able to use it, but in the longer term, it points to breaking down a lot of these barriers. So in the longer term, for me, there's a much greater degree of optimism. People being able to do business in any country around the world as though they're there. People being able to democratize the value that they create through Web3 principles. People being able to use decentralized autonomous organizations to actually set up their organizational constructs without the associated costs. There are some significant barriers to doing business and some significant barriers to lower and middle income countries that will come down as a result of this. The other thing, and you know, Judith touched upon this, that I think is fascinating, is you know, frugal innovation. You know, frugal innovation is what will drive accessibility, and you know, using things like, you know, solar powered headsets because you can't have power access. What a fantastic solution to bring to market that enables that. And I think there's a lot of that will come through from these lower and middle income countries that will actually create solutions that are more globally scalable. And scale is what's needed, really. Sustainable scale is what's needed to drive this.
Again, I love it that every time you guys are talking, you jump into the next question. This is great. What needs to happen? Second to last question, for your vision of sustainability and the metaverse to come to life, and Jon, you started touching on that. What is the most important things that need to happen next? Free for all. Who wants to answer that one?
For the metaverse? Or for
what needs to happen for the vision of sustainability in the metaverse to come to life? What is the most important things that need to happen in your mind?
From my perspective, I think that we need significant support and investment from policymakers in this. I think that, you know, at the end of the day, policymakers are going to drive a lot of the infrastructure. They're going to drive a lot of the gains, and they're going to have a significant steer on the direction that the metaverse takes. And in doing so, if they do that with sustainability as their mindset, if they do that with social justice as their mindset, if they think about the SDGs as they're applying a lot of the tenets around how we form the base layers of the metaverse, that will echo forward. That will create a steer and a direction that is a positive impact. So I think there's a key element of governance that needs to take place here, and that governance needs to establish itself with sustainability in place. When that happens, all of the tech, all of the fantastic innovation that happens around that will at least have a direction, a North Star to aim for.
Cool. Yeah. Hao, what do you think?
Yeah, I fully agree with Jon. I think one issue with the metaverse nowadays is that there is a little bit of a misconception of what it is for and what it can be for, right? I mean, we're in the process of trying to figure out what are the opportunities, what are the benefits, what can the technology do? We're not completely there, but I think, you know, a lot of it so far has been driven by the industry, and they have a different agenda of what they want to use the metaverse for. And, you know, some of that is actually good. Not everything is bad about that. But I think for the goal of sustainability, I think the government needs to step in. I think probably one of the most important aspects to it is the ability, or maybe the lowest hanging fruit, in my opinion, is the education sector. Like, you know, everything that Judith said is really important, because, I mean, we have been trying to identify at MBZUAI what are the, you know, key things, and education is one of the most impactful things you can solve using the metaverse. Just think of it as virtual reality in the first place was designed for training and simulation, for pilots, for astronauts, right? It was basically to do something that you can't do physically. Now, the huge impact here is that you have the ability to give people the quality of education that is not possible otherwise. So we talked a lot about how can we improve this and that. Do we really need it? We don't know. But here, there's an opportunity of solving something that cannot be done otherwise. I mean, as the first time I hear about the number of 1 billion, children not having access to proper education. What if we could enable that? We really have to see Metaverse and AI together. If you can replicate, teachers that teach them certain things, you can basically, basically just think of like a more powerful Google with a person that has the ability to coach you, you can learn new languages. I think all these about new cultures, all these possibilities are huge, and it can only, in my opinion, it can only be solved using the metaverse, because how can you otherwise get the resources for an individual, for each individual?
I'd like to add, and also teach people in different ways, right? We have a model for education that's fairly standardized over the last 100 years. Like, different brains learn in different ways. And I think it's really an opportunity to tailor education to people in the way that most teaches them, the way that they hear it the best. So that's an exciting part of education for me, the virtual part, because I'm a visual person. If I had been allowed to see my chemistry as opposed to reading the formulas, it would have been a whole different experience, I think. I have one more question. How can the metaverse, this is the last one, how can the metaverse be used as a tool to promote awareness and inspire action? Judith, you're smiling.
Yes, so actually I wanted to jump in on the last question before this one, and just to how do we get there to the sustainable, and all of that with the metaverse. And I think a key thing that has to happen, and really building on all that Jon said as well, is that there must be kind of like global access and true access, right, to the technologies that will inform the metaverse, to AR and to VR. And there has to be like a global commitment that there is equal access, which literally does not exist right now. Things are changing, but they're changing too slowly. And I often sort of like juxtapose sort of like what's happening in other parts of the world with like the equivalent on the African continent. And I let people know that in terms of funding, I mean, everybody talks about the billions and billions being invested in the metaverse space. It's like negligible the corresponding amount and all of that. Access to hardware, the big tech companies don't sell their hardware in the African continent. Like, it's sort of like legion, sort of like the things and obstacles you come up against, despite all of the challenges that are already inherent. And I think we've got to do something about that. There's a lot of talk about policy. I think that's really, really important. I mean, on the African continent as well, there's onus on the governments there to do something about it. But I think also there has to be some sort of kind of like global reckoning where we say, actually, what are we doing now to make sure that we get to where we want to with the metaverse, as opposed to, all of the how do we knowns that we're doing with, artificial intelligence right now, for example. Yeah. So I'm really hoping that we start to see those kind of shifts happening sooner rather than later.
Understood. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I have so many more things I would love to hear from this panel. I do want to thank everybody for being here today and for your insights and your wisdom. I did want to quickly go around and say, how can people find you if they want to find out more?
They can go to my website at how-li.com. They can also check me out on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, like all the social media handles.
Judith, how can people find you?
Please connect with me on LinkedIn.
Sounds good. Jon?
You can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everybody's time. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. If you would like to watch the entire session, or indeed any of the Zayed Sustainability Prize's monthly Voices of Sustainability panels, everything can be found on the Zayed Sustainability Prize's YouTube channel. Thank you very much for tuning in.